Hello, my name is Mallory Hinck, and welcome to my podcast, Teen Talk, Politics Made Simple. This podcast is for my senior project, where I discuss the impact of political polarization on American democracy. I am making this podcast to grant every teenager the skills and understanding they need to be able to participate in our government. In this podcast, I will break down big ideas in government, law, and politics in a way that makes sense, no matter how much you already know about them. If you're a teen who's been curious about how the government works, or you just want to understand what your civics teacher is talking about, this is the place for you. Today, we're going to dive into something super important, the three branches of government. If you've ever wondered what makes the U.S. government tick, or why your president can't just do whatever they want, this episode will clear that up. The U.S. government is like a big team with different players, and understanding the roles of each part is key to understanding how the whole system works. So let's break it down. The three branches of government are the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. They all have different jobs, but they also work together to keep things balanced. We'll take a look at each one, explain what they do, and how they keep each other in check. And before we jump in, let's talk a little bit about why these branches even exist in the first place. Back in 1787, the Founding Fathers were really worried about giving one person or group too much power. That's why they came up with this system of checks and balances. It's like a built-in safety net, making sure no one branch can get too powerful or mess things up for everyone else. Let's start with the executive branch. This is probably the branch most people are familiar with because it's where the president and vice president live and work. But the executive branch is way more than just the White House. The president is leader of the executive branch, and their job is to enforce the laws passed in Congress. But they don't do it alone. They have a whole team that helps them run the country. The cabinet, various federal agencies like the FBI, NASA, and military leaders. The president also plays a big role in foreign policy, basically deciding how we interact with other countries, and is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. If the U.S. ever goes to war, the president is in charge of military strategy and decisions. But, here's the important part, there are limits to their power. Congress can declare war, and the president can't just make laws. They can suggest laws or executive orders, but it's up to Congress who passes most of the laws. That brings us to the next branch, the legislative branch. So, what is the legislative branch? It's made up of Congress, which is divided into two parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Together, these two bodies are responsible for making laws. Let's break it down. The House of Representatives has 435 members, and they represent districts from all across the country. Their job is to create laws that reflect the needs and interests of their specific regions. House members serve 2-year terms, so they're up for re-election pretty often. Right now, our representatives for New Hampshire are Chris Pappas from District 1 and Annie Custer from District 2. Then, there's the Senate. The Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state, and they serve 6-year terms. Senators are seen as having a broader perspective since they represent entire states, not just individual districts. Currently, our senators are Maggie Hassan and Jeanne Shaheen. And here's the thing about Congress. It has some serious power. They can pass laws on just about anything, like healthcare, education, taxes, or the environment. And they control the government's money. They're the ones who decide how much money the government spends and how it's spent. But again, Congress isn't all-powerful. The president can veto a bill passed by Congress, which means they can reject it. But Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 majority vote in both the House and the Senate. This is where checks and balances come into play again. And last, but definitely not least, we have the judicial branch. This is the system of courts that interprets the laws and makes sure they're applied fairly. The highest court in the land is the Supreme Court, which is made up of 9 justices. The Supreme Court is like the final boss of the judicial system. They decide on cases that have big, important implications, like issues of civil rights or constitutional questions. If a case makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court, that decision becomes the law of the land. But the courts don't just sit around waiting for cases to show up. They actively review laws and actions taken by the President or Congress to make sure they follow the Constitution. If a law goes against the Constitution, the courts can strike it down. This is called judicial review. It's another way that the branches keep each other in check. The judicial branch doesn't create laws, but it interprets them and ensures that they're consistent with the Constitution. Okay, so now we know what each branch does, but what's really cool is how they all work together and keep each other in check. This system of checks and balances is built right into the Constitution. Here's an example. Let's say the president wants to pass a law. They might suggest something, but it's Congress that has to pass it. Even if Congress does pass it, the president can veto it, saying, I don't agree with this law. But then, if Congress feels really strongly about it, they can override a veto. And then, let's say the law goes into effect, but someone thinks it's unconstitutional. they could take the case to the court, and the judicial branch could decide that the law isn't allowed. So even though the president and Congress did their parts, the courts can step in and stop them if it goes against the Constitution. That's what's so cool about this system. Each branch has power, but none of them can dominate the others. They're all keeping an eye on each other, making sure no one branch gets too carried away. So, why should you care about all of this? Well, first off, understanding how the government works is super important for being an informed citizen. When you understand the branches and how they interact, you can better understand current events, debates, and decisions that affect your life. If you see a law that doesn't seem right or a government action that seems unfair, you'll know who to hold accountable. Do you need to talk to your Congress member, or is it something the courts need to take a look at? Having this knowledge can help you engage with the world around you. Plus, knowing how the system works means you can be a part of it. When you vote, whether it's for the president, members of the Congress, or judges, you're taking an active role in shaping how the branches interact and how power is balanced. Alright, so that's a wrap on our deep dive into the three branches of government. I hope you learned something new about how each system works and why it's so important. And now, we have our bearings, so it's time that we take a deep dive into the fascinating intersections of history, law, and politics. Now, we're going to explore the foundations of law and government through the lens of ancient Greece and Rome, comparing them to the democratic and legal structures created by America's founding fathers. By looking at ancient civilizations' legal systems, we will be able to better understand the unique system of government that emerged in the United States and what lessons we can still learn today. So, let's start with ancient Greece, particularly Athens, often considered the birthplace of democracy. Now, when we think of Greek democracy, we usually think of the city-state of Athens around 5th century BCE. At its height, Athens was governed by a system known as direct democracy, a system in which citizens themselves would vote on laws, policy decisions, and other important issues. But here's the catch. When we say citizens, air quotes here, we're not talking about everyone. Only free men who had completed their military training and were born in Athens were considered citizens. No women, slaves, or foreigners could participate. So while Athenian democracy was revolutionary for its time, it was still very limited by modern standards. Still, the structure was very innovative. In the Athenian assembly, eligible citizens could speak and vote on proposals, and the majority decision would carry the day. This direct form of democracy contrasts sharply with the representative democracy we see in the U.S. today, but it laid the groundwork for the idea that government should serve the will of the people. Now, let's turn to Rome, where we see a shift from democracy to republicanism, and eventually imperial rule. Roman law is where we really begin to see the development of legal principles that influence modern systems, including that of the United States. The Romans created a highly structured legal system that was codified in the 12 Tables around 450 BCE. The 12 Tables were essentially a set of written laws that applied to all Roman citizens. This was important because they were written down. Laws were largely arbitrary and could change depending on the whims of the aristocracy. Codifying them allowed the public to know what laws were and how they would be enforced. But even more important than the 12 Tables was the Roman legal tradition. The Romans developed principles like equality before the law, the right to defense, and innocent until proven guilty, concepts that are foundational to modern legal systems, including our own in the U.S. The concept of jus civile, or civil law, in particular, became the foundation of legal systems throughout Europe and much of the Western world. And when the founding fathers of the United States were drafting the Constitution, they looked to Roman law as one of the major influences. In fact, the concept of public law, laws concerning the relationship between the state and the individual, is rooted in Roman legal theory. Now let's fast forward to the 18th century, where a group of intellectuals and revolutionaries in the American colonies sought to create a government that would ensure freedom, protect rights, and promote justice. All ideas we've already seen in Greek and Roman legal traditions. The American Revolution was, in many ways, a revolt against monarchy and aristocracy. The Founding Fathers, including men like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, drew upon ancient ideas of governance, but they had a new vision, one that incorporated the lessons of the past while also rejecting old forms of government that concentrated power in the hands of few. One of the most radical ideas to emerge from the American Revolution was the concept of popular sovereignty, the belief that people themselves were the ultimate source of authority. This idea echoed the democratic principles seen in Athens, but with a key difference. Rather than direct participation in every decision, Americans created a representative democracy, where citizens elect officials to make decisions on their behalf. The Constitution, which was signed in 1787, reflected this shift. So, how exactly did Greece and Rome influence the creation of the U.S. Constitution? Let's break it down. In terms of government structure, the Roman Republican model, especially their Senate, served as an important example for the U.S. founders. The Roman Senate was an advisory body made up of elite citizens, and while it didn't have the power to directly make laws, it had significant influence. The U.S. Senate, created by the founders, was modeled after the structure, though it had its own distinct powers, including approval of treaties and confirming appointments. Another key influence was the Roman system of checks and balances. The Romans had a system where power was divided between various branches of government: consuls, the Senate, and the assemblies, each with specific roles and functions. The American system of separation of powers, where the executive, legislative, and judicial branches are separate and can limit each other's powers, was clearly influenced by Roman ideas. And of course, we can't forget about the rule of law. Both the Greeks and the Romans contributed significantly to the idea that laws should be applied equally to all citizens and that no one, not even rulers, is above the law. This concept was crucial for the Founding Fathers, who wanted to ensure that the U.S. government would operate under the rule of law, rather than the whims of a single monarch or aristocracy. While there are clear influences, there are also significant differences between the ancient systems and the American model. For one thing, the citizenship in ancient Greece and Rome was far more exclusive than in the U.S. In Athens, only male citizens could participate, and in Rome, the right to vote and hold office was initially restricted to a small elite. In contrast, the U.S. Constitution was revolutionary for its inclusion of all men, eventually, and later women and former slaves as full citizens. This expansion of rights marked a major departure from the ancient models. Additionally, while Athens practiced direct democracy and Rome was a republic with a senate, the United States system blends the idea of republicanism with checks and balances, federalism, and a written constitution. The U.S. Constitution, which created our republic, established a national government with specific powers while reserving certain powers for state governments, a concept that didn't exist in either Athens or Rome. So, what can we conclude from this comparison? It's clear that the legal systems of ancient Greece and Rome were crucial building blocks for the development of the American system of government. While the Founding Fathers were clearly influenced by these ancient models, they were also keenly aware of their flaws and sought to create a government that would avoid the same mistakes. The American system is unique in its commitment to popular sovereignty, individual rights, and the rule of law, but is also deeply indebted to the ideas and experiences of ancient Greece and Rome. From the Athenian notation of democracy to the Roman emphasis on law and republicanism, we can see echoes of the past in the way the United States structures its government today. And the most remarkable part? The system created by the Founding Fathers, while heavily influenced by antiquity, was designed to be adaptable, allowing for growth and change. That flexibility has allowed the U.S. government to evolve over time, expanding rights and ensuring a more inclusive democracy. As we look at today's legal and political challenges, it's worth remembering these ancient influences and continuing to learn from both their successes and their failures. Thank you for tuning in to Teen Talk, Politics Made Simple. I hope today's episode has given you a deeper understanding of the three branches of government and how ancient Greek and Roman law helped shape American government. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.